Number 1.
On December 17, 1938, 19-year-old college graduate Margaret Martin left her home in Kingston, Pennsylvania, to meet with an unknown man who offered her a potential secretarial job. When she failed to return, Martin's family reported her missing and began a search of the surrounding area. 4 days later, her body was discovered in the wilderness around 20 miles away. She had been horribly tortured, mutilated and strangled before her bound and trussed body was dumped in a mountain stream where it was found by a hunter. There were few clues as to her killer's identity, except the owner of a sawmill reported interrupting an unknown trespasser, and police believe this is where the murder occurred. Witnesses came forward with a description of a man seen with Martin around the time of her disappearance, but no one has ever been arrested and charged in connection with her murder. At the beginning of December 1938, Margaret Martin graduated with honors from Wilkes-Barre Business College, having attended classes to gain secretarial skills with the intention of finding work as a stenographer. A former classmate, Betty Hopkins, described her as a shy, studious, friendly girl who had many friends, and she was well-liked within the community of Kingston, in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. Her parents raised Margaret and her siblings as devout Catholics, and her father, John Martin, was a coal mine foreman and member of the local Democratic Committee. The Martins had 4 children, of which 19-year-old Margaret was the eldest and included 17-year-old Mary, 15-year-old Helen and 12-year-old Jack. Margaret Martin was contacted the Saturday morning of 17 December 1938 by an unknown man who offered her a job. He explained he was setting up an insurance company and was in need of a qualified stenographer and had a suitable secretarial position available. He added that he had heard of her through the Wilkes-Barre Business College. Ms. Martin was gleefully anticipating her first job since graduating college and looking forward to earning some money before the Christmas holidays, and she agreed to meet with the man at Kingston Corners, located not far from the Martin family home. When she left the house that morning to keep her appointment with the mysterious telephone caller, Margaret promised her parents she would return home immediately. It would be the last time they saw her alive. When she failed to appear by the evening, her worried family and friends contacted police and reported her missing. During the investigation into her disappearance, police and volunteers conducted a search of the surrounding area. Several witnesses came forward with information pertinent to the case. Martin was seen the day of her disappearance in conversation with an unknown man, and then getting into what was described as a black sedan or brown Plymouth. The description given of the man was vague, and he was believed to be a suave, neat, sandy-haired young man, slightly overweight and between the ages of 25 and 30 years old. None of the witnesses were able to identify the license plate of the car. There were numerous theories on what might have happened to Ms. Martin, with some believing she had been kidnapped. The absence of a ransom note seemed to indicate that it was more likely she was either the victim of a sex maniac or had fallen victim to white slaver traders. The search failed to find any trace of her, and the publicity surrounding the disappearance was hampered because the local newspapers were on strike. On December 21, 1938, just several days after she vanished, the body of Margaret Martin was discovered in the Wyoming County woodlands, around 25 miles from her home. 19-year-old Anthony Rizikowski was out trapping muskrats in the forested area when he made the grim discovery. As he places snares under a footbridge, he noticed a large burlap sack which had been partially submerged in 2 feet of shallow water in Keelersburg Creek, which was 8 miles from Tunkhannock. When he went to investigate further, he noticed the bag had been stitched with twine, and one of the knots had slipped open, revealing a human arm. When he peeked inside, he saw the naked body of a young woman and immediately notified police. It was soon identified as the body of Margaret Martin, and it was determined she had been dead for at least 24 hours. Tracks along the tiny Keelersburg Creek were blotted out by snow, and state troopers conducted a search the immediate area looking for clues. The coroner concluded from the bruises to her neck that the cause of death was strangulation. But she suffered many other wounds and had been tortured and mutilated by her killer. Her body showed signs of having been beaten with a large object, possibly a rock, and there were knife wounds to her stomach and thigh. The coroner commented that she had suffered the molestation of a degenerate. Her family was notified, and John Martin said of his daughter, "Our little girl fought for herself and died the pure girl she was," whilst her mother said, "She is with God today." Lieutenant Charles S. Cook headed a detail of the state police investigation into the murder and asserted the killer was apparently someone familiar with the Wyoming woodlands who had driven a car to roughly 75 yards from the bridge, then carried the body to the spot where it was found. He reiterated this fact by saying, someone familiar with the territory placed the body in the creek, and it might not have been found for several years if the young man setting traps had not passed through the lonely section. Because of the remote location of the discovery and the manner in which the body was found, convinced Lieutenant Cook that the murder took place somewhere else. The owner of a Forkston sawmill, James Kedd, reported finding a trespasser on his property and fired a warning shot in the intruder's direction, apparently scaring the man off. This incident occurred the day before Martin's body was discovered, and the sawmill was 12 miles from Keelerburg Creek. Police theorized the trespasser was the killer who murdered Martin inside the sawmill and then attempted to dismember her body and destroy it in the mill's firebox. Ashes were recovered from the sawmill boiler, and police were confident there would contain particles of clothing worn by Ms. Martin, along with metal fragments believed to be a dress ornament. However, these were analyzed by a Wilkes-Barre chemist and found to contain only waste material. Major William Clark, the 3rd Squadron commander who headed the state police investigation, concluded that the sawmill theory had been almost eliminated, but more inquiries would be made. The only clues left with the body were the 2 burlap bags in which the body was found, a length of sash cord which had bound the body, and a gentleman's silk scarf, which had no identifying marks. On December 22, the Scranton Tribune made a prediction that the killer would be captured within the following 24 hours. The funeral of Margaret Martin was held on December 24 at St. Ignatius Church in Kingston, and many hundreds of people were in attendance. Several plainclothed officers were also present, working on the belief they might spot someone acting suspiciously. 4 days later, on December 28, Pennsylvania State Senator Leo C. Mundy declared that he would introduce a bill at the next state legislature which would make sex crimes punishable by execution. It would also include the registration of all sex offenders and requirement of all physicians, social and welfare workers to report anyone who exhibited such tendencies. Senator Mundy was prompted to introduce this bill as a direct result of Margaret Martin's brutal murder. The Deputy Commissioner of the State Police, Colonel Cecil M. Wilhelm, predicted that the mystery of her death would someday be solved. The investigation explored many other avenues, including a suspicious vehicle seen parked at a mountain cabin on the night of the murder, which might possibly have belonged to the killer, but was soon ruled out when the owner gave police a satisfactory explanation for his movements in the area. Further leads also led nowhere. A reported incident where a bundle of clothing thrown from a car near Orwigsburg was suspected to be the killer disposing of Martin's clothes, but proved to be unrelated. Officers' attempts to check a statement that a witness attributed to a Kingston man who allegedly said, "I'm going to make a date with that Martin girl, or break my neck in the attempt," proved fruitless. By early 1939, most leads in the case either fizzled out or resulted in a dead end for detectives. The manhunt for the killer would continue, and by February 1939, many suspects were investigated and discounted. 2 men who attempted to attack a 16-year-old girl from Hanover Township in Luzerne County were questioned and cleared. Many locals had their own theories on who the killer might be, such as a mortician from Wyoming County, a local assistant pastor, a businessman's son who left the area soon after the murder, a local teenager who had a crush on the victim, and similarly a teacher at the Wilkes-Barre Business College who held an infatuation with Martin. The case was the most baffling mysteries the local and state police had ever encountered. In June 1939, the Luzerne County District Attorney's Office announced there would be no request to Luzerne County Commissioners to offer a reward for the capture of the killer. However, it was disclosed that new clues had surfaced in the case which might soon lead to the arrest of one of 2 suspects. He did not specify what those clues were nor whether an arrest was imminent. Despite this promising development, nothing further was revealed, and no arrests were made. In September 1942, 21-year-old Orban Taylor of New York City confessed to Scranton police that he was responsible for the death of Margaret Martin. Taylor was formerly a resident of Wilkes-Barre and told investigators he visited the area while serving in the U.S. Army. Despite his admission of guilt, Taylor was unable to reveal to detectives how he disposed of the victim's clothing, which had never been found. After more than 10 hours of questioning, the young man repudiated his confession. New York Detective Captain George W. Donaldson, who was leading the investigation, explained that the military authorities at Fort J joined the investigation being conducted by the State Motor Police and the Federal Bureau of Investigation because Taylor had been dishonorably discharged from the Army. Although he denied murdering Ms. Martin, he did confess to other crimes, including several robberies, a stabbing in New York, and of defrauding several hotels in Philadelphia, Newark, New Jersey, and Elizabeth, New Jersey. Subsequently, he was not charged with murder. In the decades after her murder, the circumstances of Margaret Martin's death are still unexplained, and her killer has never been brought to justice. Many of those who worked the case came to believe the man responsible must have been a local because of his knowledge of the area, whilst others suspect it might have been the work of a serial killer. Despite the advancement of forensic scientific techniques, the case remains unsolved.
Number 2.
Tucked away in the northwest corner of Missouri is a small, dusty town 46 miles north of St. Joseph, with a decades-old secret. This past weekend marked the 40th anniversary of the killing of Ken Rex McElroy of Skidmore. And despite there being dozens of witnesses, no one has ever been arrested or charged in connection with McElroy's murder. Ken McElroy died in a hail of gunfire on the morning of July 10, 1981, while sitting in his truck outside a local tavern. He was known as the town bully, but they may be putting it mildly. In the decades preceding his murder, McElroy terrorized the denizens of Skidmore. He was accused or suspected of dozens of crimes, including theft, livestock rustling, burglary, arson, assault, rape, and child molestation. He was charged 21 times in theft cases, but was said to have avoided conviction through witness intimidation, either by direct confrontation or by parking his truck outside their home. McElroy raped a 12-year-old girl, and, to avoid statutory rape charges, he divorced his wife at the time and married the child when she was 14 and pregnant with their baby. McElroy burned down the girl's home and shot her family's dog to force her parents to agree to the marriage. He torched the home and shot the dog again after the girl went into hiding with her and McElroy's baby. In July 1976, McElroy pulled a shotgun on farmer Romaine Henry and shot the man in the stomach. Henry survived and McElroy was charged with assault with intent to kill. However, when the matter came to trial, McElroy's attorney produced a pair of witnesses who testified they were hunting with McElroy that day, and he was nowhere near the scene of the shooting. McElroy was found not guilty. In 1980, McElroy shot the 70-year-old town grocer in the neck, following a months-old dispute over an accusation about a piece of stolen candy. The grocer lived and McElroy was again arrested and charged with attempted murder. McElroy was convicted of assault but let out of jail awaiting appeal. He went about making public threats against the grocer while armed with a rifle. On the morning of July 10, 1981, several townspeople met with the Nottoway County Sheriff at a local hall to discuss what could be done about McElroy. The sheriff suggested they form a neighborhood watch and advised the group not to confront the man. Meanwhile, McElroy and his wife arrived at the D&G Tavern for a morning drink. After the sheriff left town, the group walked from the hall and went down the street to the tavern. McElroy eventually left the tavern and got into his pickup truck with his wife, but the mob of people followed the pair outside. According to reports, some 50 people were outside the tavern when the shooting started. McElroy was struck by 2 different firearms and died behind the wheel of his truck. McElroy's wife was not injured and escaped the vehicle. According to a report, no one called an ambulance. Local authorities, including a coroner's jury and a local grand jury, and even the FBI, investigated the killing, but to no avail. McElroy's wife named one person as a possible gunman, but no one could or would identify who fired the shots. She eventually filed a wrongful death against the town, the county, and some citizens, but the matter was settled out of court. McElroy's wife, whom he victimized as a child, remarried and moved to Lebanon, Missouri. She died of cancer on January 24, 2012. It was her 55th birthday. The case inspired a book, In Broad Daylight by Harry McLean, and a 1991 TV movie of the same name starring Brian Dennehy. A&E, Rolling Stone, Playboy, 60 Minutes, and other media outlets covered the story in print or television. In 2019, the McElroy killing was the subject of a docuseries on Sundance. BuzzFeed's Unsolved network produced a 24-minute true crime documentary on the shooting.
Number 3.
Between April 11 and April 12, 1981, Glenna Sue Sharp and 3 others were brutally killed in the resort town of Keddie, California. To this day, the murders remain unsolved. On the morning of April 12, 1981, Sheila Sharp returned to her home at Cabin 28 in the Keddie Resorts in California from the next-door neighbor's house. What the 14-year-old girl discovered inside the modest 4-room cabin instantly became one of the most macabre scenes in modern American crime history and has come to be known as the gruesome Keddie murders. Inside Cabin 28 were the bodies of her mother, Glenna Sue Sharp, her teenage brother John, and his high school friend, Dana Wingate. The 3 had been bound by medical and electrical tape and had either been viciously stabbed, strangled, or bludgeoned. Sheila's sister, 12-year-old Tina Sharp, was nowhere to be found. Stranger still, in an adjoining bedroom, the 2 youngest Sharp boys, Ricky and Greg, as well as their friend and neighbor, 12-year-old Justin Smart, were found unharmed. They had apparently slept through the entire massacre, which had unfolded mere feet from their beds. The Sharp family had just moved into Cabin 28 the year before. Sue had just divorced her husband and brought her children from Connecticut to Keddie in Northern California. The 6 of them, 36-year-old Sue, her 15-year-old son John, 14-year-old daughter Sheila, 12-year-old daughter Tina, and 10-year-old Rick and 5-year-old Greg, were friendly with their nearby neighbors at the Keddie Resort. The night before the murders, Sheila had slept over a friend's house down the street. John and his 17-year-old friend Dana had hitchhiked to a nearby town of Quincy for a party and returned sometime later that evening. Tina had briefly joined her sister at the neighbors before returning home to her mother, 2 younger brothers, and one of the neighbor boys, Justin Smart. When Sheila returned home early the next morning to find her mother, brother, and his friend bloodied on the living room floor, she bolted back to her neighbor's house. Her friend's dad retrieved the 3 unharmed boys through their bedroom window so they would not have to see the scene. The murders had been notably violent. Investigators were called about an hour after Sheila had discovered her slain family. Deputy Hank Clement was the first to arrive on the scene, and he reported blood everywhere on the walls, the bottoms of the victims' shoes, Sue's bare feet, the bedding in Tina's room, the furniture, the ceiling, the doors, and on the back steps. The prevalence of blood suggested to investigators that the victims had been moved and rearranged from the positions in which they were murdered. Young John was closest to the front door, face up, his hands blood-covered and bound with medical tape. His throat had been slit. His friend Dana was on the floor beside him on his stomach. His head was badly damaged as though bashed in with a blunt object, and lay partially on a pillow. He had been manually strangled. His ankles were tied with electrical wire, which was wound also around John's ankles, so that the 2 were connected. Sheila's mother had been covered partially with a blanket, though that had done little to hide her gruesome injuries. On her side, the mother of 5 was naked from the waist down, tightly gagged with a bandana and her own underwear secured with medical tape. She had injuries consistent with a struggle and had an imprint of the butt of an .880 pellet gun on the side of her head. Like her son, her throat had been cut. All victims had suffered blunt force trauma by hammer or hammers. They also all sustained multiple stab wounds. A bent steak knife was on the floor. A butcher knife and claw hammer, both also bloodied, were side by side on a small wooden table near the entry into the kitchen. It would take the police hours to realize that a 4th victim, Tina, was missing. When it was eventually discovered that Tina Sharp was missing, the FBI arrived on the scene. The sheriff at the time of the murders, Doug Thomas, and his deputy, Lieutenant Don Stoy, were not initially able to discern an apparent motive. The murders at Keddie Cabin 28 appeared to be random acts of cruelty. The strangest thing is that there is no apparent motive. Any case without an apparent motive is the toughest to solve. Stoy recalled to the Sacramento Bee in 1987. Further, the home did not indicate forced entry, though detectives did recover an unidentified fingerprint from a handrail on the back stairs. The cabin's telephone had been left off the hook, and all of the lights had been shut off, as well as the drapes closed. More confounding is that the three youngest boys were not only untouched, but allegedly unaware of the event, even though a woman and her boyfriend in the cabin next door awoke around 1:30 a.m. to what they described were muffled screams. Unable to discern from where they were coming, they went back to bed. However, though the three boys initially claimed to have slept through the massacre, Ricky and Greg's friend Justin Smart did later say that he saw Sue with two men in the house that night. One reportedly had a mustache and long hair, and the other was clean-shaven with short hair, but both in glasses. One of the men had a hammer. Justin reported then that John and Dana entered the home and argued with the men, which resulted in a violent fight. Tina was then allegedly taken out the cabin's back door by one of the men. Allegedly, a lot of potential evidence was collected at the scene, but because this was pre-DNA testing, very little helpful information was found at this time. Sheriff Thomas called the Sacramento Department of Justice, which then sent in two special agents from their organized crime unit, not homicide, which struck many as odd. Immediately, the two lead suspects were Justin Smart's father and the Sharps' neighbors, Martin Smart and his houseguest, ex-convict John Bo Budab, who was known to have connections to organized crime in the area. Both men had been seen in suits and ties behaving oddly in the bar the night before. Martin Smart later told the police that he had a hammer that matched the one discovered, and also that his hammer had gone missing shortly before the murders. Later that year, a knife was recovered in a trash can outside the Ketty General Store. Authorities also believe this item to be linked to the crimes. It would be another 3 years after the Ketty murders that Tina was found. A man discovered a human skull in the adjoining Butte County, about 30 miles from Ketty, in Plumas County. Near the remains, detectives also found a child's blanket, a blue nylon jacket, a pair of jeans with a missing back pocket, and an empty surgical tape dispenser. With that, the remains of Tina Sharp had been found, which made the crimes committed on April 11 or 12, 1981, a quadruple homicide. The Butte County Sheriff's Department soon received an anonymous call asking, "I was wondering if they thought of the murder up in Ketty up in Plumas County a couple years ago, where a 12-year-old girl was never found." Meanwhile, Sheriff Thomas had resigned from the investigation 3 months in, and take a job instead at the Sacramento Dodge. His handling of the case in retrospect would be considered disastrous at best and corrupt at worst. "I was told the suspects were told to get out of town, so to me, that means it was covered up," Sheila Sharp told CBS Sacramento in 2016. The Sharps' home was demolished in 2004. Remarkably, the tape of the anonymous tip regarding Tina was found sealed in case files, untouched by Plumas County Sheriff's Department until 2013, when the case was reopened with new investigators, Plumas Sheriff Greg Hagwood and Special Investigator Mike Gamberg. In 2016, Gamberg located a hammer believed to be one of the murder weapons in a dried-up pond in Ketty. Further, it came to light that Marilyn Smart, Marty's wife and mother of Justin, had left her husband on the day of the murder discovery. Afterward, she provided Plumas County Sheriff's Department with a handwritten letter sent to her and signed by her estranged husband. It read, "I've paid the price of your love, and now that I've bought it with 4 people's lives, you tell me we are through. Great. What else do you want?" This letter was not treated as a confession, nor was it followed up on at the time. Even though Marilyn admitted in a 2008 documentary that she thought her husband, his friend Bo, was responsible, Sheriff Doug Thomas contradicted this and stated that Martin had successfully passed a polygraph test. It was later confirmed that Martin was close with this sheriff. In 2016, Gamberg met with a counselor at the Reno Veterans Administration. The anonymous counselor told him that in May 1981, Martin Smart had confessed to killing Sue and Tina Sharp. "I killed the woman and her daughter, but I didn't have anything to do with the boys," he purportedly told the counselor. When the Dodge was alerted to this confession in 1981, they dismissed it as hearsay. The most widely accepted theory involves a love triangle between Martin, Marilyn, and Sue. It was believed that Martin and Sue were having an affair, and that Sue was supposedly counseling Marilyn to leave her husband, who she had said was abusive to her. When Martin discovered this, he enlisted Bo, his friend and known mob enforcer who had lived with the Smarts a mere 10 days before the Ketty murders, to take Sue out of the picture. This would account for Marilyn leaving her husband the day of the murder discovery. It would also explain why the Smart boy and the other Sharp boys in the adjoining room were spared. Additionally, it gives context to Martin's handwritten note that Marilyn gave to the Plumas Sheriff's Department. Some investigators who picked up the case when it reopened in 2013 tie the slayings into an even larger plot. To Gamberg, it is clear that the Dodge and Thomas-run Sheriff's Department covered it up, is the way it sounds. He alleges that Bo and Martin fit into a larger drug smuggling scheme that involved the federal government. Martin was a known drug dealer, and Bo was connected to Chicago crime syndicates with financial interests in drug distribution. This might explain why the Sacramento Dodge sent two allegedly corrupt organized crime special agents instead of agents from the homicide department. It also provides an explanation as to why the two lead suspects were seemingly given a free pass and told to leave town by Sheriff Thomas. Furthermore, it suggests an answer as to why this case was handled so sloppily, remains unsolved, and is seemingly not a priority to the Sacramento Dodge. What is known is that this 37-year-old crime is far from a cold case, as new evidence sheds light on what may have occurred at Cabin 28 in Keddie, California. Although both Martin Smart and Bo Budab are now deceased, new DNA evidence has pointed investigators to other suspects who may have had a hand in these murders and who are still alive. It's my belief that there were more than two people who were involved in the totality of the crime, the disposal of the evidence, and the abduction of the little girl, Hagwood said. We're convinced that there are a handful of people that fit those roles who are still alive.